Welcome to Matters of Business, brought to you by the College of Business here at Florida Atlantic University. I'm Amber, and this is where academic research meets the real world of business. Each episode, we sit down with faculty experts, student researchers, and business leaders to really unpack what's shaping industries today, whether that's from consumer behavior and supply chains to finance, economics, and executive education. If you're ready to stay informed and ahead of the curve, right here in South Florida, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. A lot of times when we think about business, we think about the data. How is the economy functioning? How is inflation up? How many points did the Dow drop? But we often forget a key component, which I'm going to call the business of behavior. Why did people invest in that stock? How did a company lose such a great employee? Why did a customer choose one brand over another? Behavioral science explains why people buy, why they quit, why they trust, and why they make the business decisions that they do, and how these decisions can often have big impacts on businesses. And that's where FAU's Behavioral Insight Lab comes in. The lab studies why people make the decisions that they do and what it means for businesses and consumer decision making. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Melanie Lorenz, director of our Behavioral Insights Lab, and Dr. Michael Harari, a researcher here at the College of Business. Today, they're going to sit down with me and really pull back the curtain on what our Behavioral Insights Lab is doing and why it matters. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for
My
having us.
pleasure.
So, I really want to start at the beginning. For someone who has never heard of a Behavioral Insights Lab, what is it in plain terms?
Absolutely. So a behavioral insight lab, that's really a space where we study how people, and that could be consumers, entrepreneurs, customers, how they actually think, decide, and behave, and not how we assume they do. So we want to really test behavior. We want to establish how they react. So think of it as kind of this human behavior test kitchen. I'm trying to refer to it when I want to talk to somebody about it. We can try out as researchers ideas we have. We can measure reactions and understand what truly drives choices, behavior. And I think we will talk a couple of those studies in a little bit. But for us, really, the Behavioral Insights Lab gives researchers here in the College of Business easy and efficient access to participants to test ideas without having to go to external tools, which are often much more complicated to administer and very costly. So we see this as a way of advanced research here in the college.
So, Michael, as a researcher, can you kind of walk us through what sort of gap does this fill? Because I assume that there's a gap in what we're missing in terms of what actually drives these decisions and business decisions.
Yeah, the lab has really been a win-win, I think, for students and for faculty here, because on the one hand, what do we do as a university? We develop and we disseminate knowledge and understanding. A lot of the times the only awareness students have of the fact that we do research and learn things here is maybe an offhand comment made by a professor here and there. So, one thing that this lab does really nicely is it gets students involved to a degree in the research process. And yes, it's as participants, but it still does make them aware that there's something more going on here than, in the university than just, covering material that's in textbooks, that this comes from somewhere. Then, on the other side, as a researcher, we often find ourselves in positions where we're trying to run a study, and running a good study takes a lot of resources. It takes time, it takes money. I do questionnaire research. You have to get people to take your questionnaires. They don't always want to. You need to pay them to do it. So the resource load can be pretty high. And, if you're going to engage in all of that effort, you want to make sure that you're using, for example, good measures that have been pilot tested. If you're going to run an experiment, you want to make sure you're using good experimental stimuli that have been pilot tested and they work. And what the lab offers then is not just an opportunity for students to learn a bit about what research is and what the research process is like, but for investigators to just try to make sure that we're off to a good start before we go into the field and do a more intensive data collection.
What would you guys say sets this lab apart from similar ones?
I would personally say who is involved in it. And we have Michael already talking about this. He's a big promoter of our lab since
I'm
we
an advocate.
initiated. Yeah. He's promoting it in his department to other researchers, to students. So really in these 2 years since we have started, we have built this research environment where everybody's engaged, from instructors, because they have to offer extra credit. They have to allow me to go into their classes and get their buy-in. Because it's some work. We try to take us away with the lab as much as we can and shoulder this work, but still we have to initiate it. And if the instructor is behind it, it's much easier to get students engaged. Then we have to have our researchers who believe in us, that it's worthwhile their time to use our lab. So there's a lot of, and we have to have in a way the administrators which are supporting us too. So there are a lot of different components. And I think this has worked beautifully so far. We've grown from 8 classes to I think 29 last semesters who are really participating. And that's a huge win also for our students. Because taking part, and I have students come up to me, it's like, oh, I took this really cool study. What's the outcome? I'm like, which of them? And hold on for a second, it might not be yet done. But that's really something rewarding to have people talk research even more than we already do.
It has been really nice seeing my students get excited about research. Just as Melanie noted, maybe they would have taken a study and maybe it was one of mine and they wanted to ask about it. I've had students tell me, oh, well, could this be a study that I could run? So there's been some excitement. And it's also, in that sense, been pretty synergistic with the university's interest in undergraduate research. This is another area where if an undergraduate wants to get involved in research, well, it can be pretty difficult recruiting a sample or something like that. But we have the lab, and it enables the students to get a foot in the door carrying out research that can help to position them, whether they want to go for a PhD program or they just want to develop better analytical skills.
So I've been able to get kind of a behind the scenes look because I believe one of our colleagues is a student and she's able to participate in these studies. But for those who are just now hearing of this, walk us through exactly what happens.
Okay. So, and we have our website set up for it really nicely, where we really try to help out students, instructors, and researchers to follow them every step. So, because it can be at the beginning daunting. So how do I get into the study? How do I take part? What do I do? So we collaborate early on with instructors, so we know they're going to offer extra credits. They send us after the add and drop date their full roster of students. And then the system, we uploaded the system automatically sends students their login information. And they create their account, and then they can start taking studies online. So our researchers, I work with them, that they set up the studies throughout the semester. They're up to 8, 9, 10 studies posted there, and the students can select based on their interest which studies they want to take. And often it's credits they can get, and so extra credits, and it might be 4 studies they have to take or can take to get full extra credit. Sometimes students are enrolled in 2, 3 classes who offers as extra credit, offering us a huge selection and a huge sample size we can work with. So the process is easy, and at the end of the semester we send the instructor a spreadsheet back with who did what credit, and they can upload it to the Canvas. So it's a pretty relatively easy process once we have established all the protocol and have gotten people behind us. If students are under 18 or they don't want to participate, we don't exclude them from the research. There are alternative assignments set up in the same system, which we grade automatically, so nothing falls back work-wise on the professor who's offering the extra credit.
So the researchers who are involved, give me a brief background. What is their academic research? What type of studies are being focused on?
We have a huge variety, and I think even Michael here is running diverse studies with us, but it is from, God, we had entrepreneurship working with us, looking at family business and how generational influences might play a role in future entrepreneurial opportunities. We have a lot of consumer research going on. We have advertising research we had in there from how certain kind of language use is impacting if people are wanting to buy the product. We have management has posted a couple of studies with us, and I'll let Michael talk a little bit more about it. Sure. But we had a wide variety of studies. We hope we get other departments on board too soon, because on the gist of it, a lot of us doing individual level research, how consumers, how employees, how students behave, or what are they thinking. So this is, I think, a huge overlap we have across the departmental divides, if you want to say it. But I let
So I'd love to get into the research aspect because I feel like that's where it gets most interesting. So Melanie, you did kind of talk to me about this job market perception. So I don't know which one of you guys wants to.
Yeah, well, that's
weigh
my
in.
study, so yeah, that's what I'm kind of interested in is how people understand themselves in relation to their job, how people perceive their jobs, how people perceive the job market.
Mhm.
And frankly, undergraduate students are a really important population from that perspective. There's so much research trying to understand how people come to form judgments of the job market when they're employed or they're in their career. And there's work there in students as well, but it's something where I think there's a lot of opportunity. So if you think about your undergraduate student, most of our students do work, but they are naturally not in their quote career jobs yet. So, how is it that they perceive their likely success on the job market? What informs that perception, and what are its implications is something that's really interesting to me. So, I've been doing work with the lab related to that issue in a number of respects. Some of them have been to develop better measures. I mentioned that can be a sticking point for research. If you have to run your study, you want to make sure you have a good measure together before you go ahead and do it. So some would have been related to that. And others have been more substantive, just trying to unpack this idea of job market perceptions among undergraduates and what are the implications of these perceptions.
So what have you kind of found so far, especially since you're focusing on undergrads?
Yeah, so I tend to look at this through what we'll call like a self-regulatory perspective.
Mhm.
So that is to say, I tend to make the assumption that most people want to be employable.
Mm.
Jobs are pretty important to most
Yeah.
people, and their security is not guaranteed.
Mm.
So undergraduates, it's maybe particularly salient because they're going to be going on the job market to try to find their first career job, but it's really an issue that's relevant to everyone. Most people, I think, want to have a job. So if we assume that most people kind of have that goal and maybe it's more or less salient at different times, we can then assume that people are doing things in order to try to improve their employability if they think it's not where they want it to be. So that's why I'm so interested in that perception, because you can only react to the perception that you have. If you want to be employable and you think you're employable, you're probably not going to do anything to try to improve your employability. If you think you're not employable, though, that's when the self-regulatory processes are going to kick in, and you may do things like network, try to develop your credentials until you feel like you've hit the sweet spot. So that's why I'm so fascinated by the perception, because I think that's what drives a lot of these behaviors. And not related to the lab, but I also have a study that's published that has shown that it has a big influence on well-being. If you think that you can get a job if you need one, you have way less stress in your life, as you
Very
might
true.
imagine,
Very
the
true.
listeners might imagine.
Yes. So if we're looking at job market perceptions, why does it matter that we're measuring this accurately, and what kind of breaks down when we don't have a clear picture of workers or potential workers, how they actually are seeing their careers?
Yeah, and I think it ties into the self-regulatory perspective I just mentioned. If and this is the real challenge, because how would you know what your chances are on the job market accurately? Fundamentally, the only way to get a real accurate picture is to actually be on the job market and see what's happening.
Mm.
But most people who are trying to get a sense of their employability are not doing that. And, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think we should be on the job market and looking for jobs all the time. It's a waste of our time, a waste of other people's time. It's stressful in its own right. So trying to figure out how to excuse me, what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to get this accurate assessment of where we stand on the job market is important because it drives those self-regulatory behaviors. It could help me to try to improve my employability if I think it needs improving, but it also can be somewhat elusive.
Mm,
So, what I'm more interested in isn't to say, well, how can we make people's perceptions more accurate? Because I don't know. I don't know if there may be some futility there.
mm,
What I'm interested in is, well, how can we measure your perceptions as accurately as possible? Your perceptions. I want to know what you think very accurately so we could at least try to better understand its development, its implications, and how that may change over time. For example, I have a study that's not published where we show that when people are on the job market, their perceptions of their employability starts to change, and it
mm.
starts to change based on the feedback they're getting. So if you take an employment assessment, if you're being considered for a job and you think you did really bad, you're going to leave there thinking, my God, I'm not employable. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas if you did think you did really good, it's the opposite. Again, it's perception. It's all perceptual. But what I'm using the lab for right now is to try to develop a better measure of that perception. Not to get too into the weeds, but most of the measures that exist right now to employability, it all is grounded in one's present job. So in other words, it's I can get a job that's better than my current job. I can get a job that would be more satisfying than my present job. But the point that we're developing is, well, what about students? What about people who are unemployed? Why is it that being able to get a good job means being able to get a better one than the one that you have? What we're suggesting is we need a better way or a different way to understand employability and to measure it that we call an absolute
Mm,
measure, right? So I can get a job that can give me a high level of satisfaction.
mhm.
We don't need to tie it to a current job or whatever. We need to tie it to an absolute standard. So that's something that we're kind of excited about. I think the lab closes next week, right?
Yeah.
So we'll download that data and we'll see what we've got.
Well, in terms of developing employability, what sort of implications would measuring that have for employers?
Yeah, so well, that's an interesting point because when it comes to employers, there's often this discussion about the employability paradox,
Mm,
where on the one hand, you want to develop your employees, you want to hire employees that have the best skills, but on the other hand, you do not want a workforce that is likely to turn over regularly for better options. So that's what's kind of called the, employability paradox. On the one hand, you get great employees. On the other hand, they may leave. However, I think there's been a lot of resolution to that paradox lately. And, the general idea is that if employers are investing in developing their employees, so that is to say, the employees are not treated as free agents who develop their own skills and can market themselves however they want, but instead they're organizational members who are being developed by the organization. They are much more likely to stay through a reciprocity mechanism. So like what we've seen over the past few decades has been a lot less internal organizational career development. A lot more of that has kind of been offloaded onto people to develop themselves as kind of career entrepreneurs.
mm.
But it seems like organizations who go the other way and go back to investing in the employees are much more likely to have employable employees who have skills and competencies and can perform effectively and also stay at the organization.
That makes sense. That does make sense. Thank you for sharing your
My
perspective,
pleasure.
Michael. Melanie, I do want to talk to you for a brief moment about this yoga study you mentioned. That is a longitudinal
Yeah.
study.
Thank
So
you
walk us
so
through what
much.
that is.
Because that gives me a little bit of opportunity to really showcase what we can do with
Yeah.
that. And I love to see how passionate our people here are and how applicable our research is,
Mhm.
not only to our students, to our own research, but also to the business community. Just knowing this, how things are changing. I mean, if you think about it, the whole certificate things we offer to exec ed, that's based on things Michael just talked about,
Mhm.
right? That this is much more development outside of the actual organization we are working in. So Yeah, but going to the yoga challenge now, this was our study with the funnest kind of title.
Okay.
But most students kind of like, oh my God, do I have to do yoga? And it's really cool to me and this is a study from our really talented colleague, Dr. Gianardini, and it's a part of a much bigger study she is conducting. But where students get so engaged that into the research study without or often forgetting this is a research study now. So they're showing actual behaviors without feeling observed, because we often change our behaviors when we are observed, when we know this is for research purposes. We try to figure out what is this about. And then we have always our biases. So we want to look good. So it might change our outcome. So when you have a study like this where students get really involved and forget what it is about it, we see the real reaction. So in this case, my colleague, she really wanted to study different ways of presenting choices to people, and especially ongoing choices. So you do a purchase or you take a service, you don't do it one time, but you want them to continue either frequenting a store, going to a gym, buying the same cookies over again, just seeing how continuous involvement, how it can be influenced. And she used the yoga challenge. So students were signing up for an online yoga course.
Okay.
And there were kind of two different buckets, we call it. Some signed up for the yoga challenge and they got a lot of options, which kind of yoga they could do. Others got much more restricted choices. There might be just a few, and she wanted to see who is persisting longer. And it was really cool because in the lab, we could, over the whole semester, she kept checking in with them and seeing they had to do, if they persisted or if they stopped contributing, if they stopped and actually decided to do different studies. And it was really interesting to see because people who had less choices persisted longer.
Interesting.
And it intensified the difference between them towards the end now of the semester. I don't think she has downloaded all the data yet, but when I asked her last, this was really the best option is to really look at a smaller set, or even when you think of crumble cookies, they have these rotating offers, which is relatively limited. But this it might be a better way of getting people to engage, to be loyal, provide less option. And this yoga challenge was one way of looking at it.
That's interesting. So I know you mentioned crumble cookie, but what other implications might it have for local businesses?
Just have stores you frequent, any kind of fitness chain. So something where you come back, where loyalty is a big part, where you want to have where you want to have a loyal customer base. So not something you do once.
Yeah.
So just it's interesting. So mostly services, I would think. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm just sitting here often on the sideline trying to help people set it up. Like our researchers following through with them. And we never done longitudinal studies before. So it was a huge learning curve for all of us. And there were two running this time in the lab.
That's
I think
impressive.
one where there were 8 times in point where
Oh, wow.
students had to participate by Mike's colleague, Stephen Reed. So I'm really excited to see these outcomes because this is where the lab becomes really valuable. Outside of a lab, it's really difficult to reach the same people over and over again. And we have basically, like as I said before, this test kitchen, we can get back, we can reach out to our students again. We have much easier access. And these studies are really expensive the moment you ask more than once a question over so this is where it really came in. It's exciting. That means there are other new things we can do next semester just to build on it. And it inspires us as researchers. When I see somebody's running a cool study, I want to do this too. And I wanted to learn it. So I sit down with a researcher. I'm like, I need to learn how to set it up. So I sat down with Stephen, with Gia, and we figured this out together. And that's a really fun part. We all learn ongoing. I think Michael wanted to say
I'll
something.
just say you should talk to Stephen at some point about his research he did here. It's customer mistreatment. So, employees' reactions to customer mistreatment and how the supervisor can help to manage the situation. I cannot speak to it beyond that, but it's an interesting study, and he's able to survey people every week for 8 weeks or something like that, and he gets the student and their supervisor to fill out surveys so he can look to see how the employee perceives the situation unfolding and how the supervisor perceives themselves as responding to the situation and how that affects the employee, in this case, the student, over time.
And seeing our industry is so service-based, this is so
Yeah.
applicable, right? Because it could happen in hotels, in restaurants, in any kind of retail shopping. I've done a lot of research on retail environments and shoplifting, deviant behavior. So it's interesting, we cross over. I learned so much about what research is done in the college that I'm much more likely to go across departmental barriers and say, hey, can we cooperate? And I think we all have highly benefited. Like before the podcast, we were talking probably for an hour about research, Michael and I. And it's just a way of connecting people to the lab.
That's good. I do want to talk about the students for a second. I know you mentioned extra credit and this almost like first touch point with research, but what else are students getting out of participating? Are they involved in some other way?
I've done some work with, so we have here at FAU the Office of Undergraduate Research and Inquiry. The goal is to get undergraduate students involved in research, not participating in research, but carrying out research. And, I've done some work like that. We've done some press releases and things. When I was an undergrad back in 2000, so I was involved in undergraduate research. That's how I got started. I kind of had interest in maybe getting a PhD and I wanted to get some research experience. I got into a lab. I was involved in research and it's had a huge impact on my life. Obviously, here I am today doing my own research. So giving back, I think, to undergraduate students, getting undergraduate students involved in research who may be interested, I think is incredibly important. And the lab offers a great opportunity to do that. An undergraduate student who is involved in research, or excuse me, who is interested in getting involved with research, we can plan out a study, we can get it on the lab, the next semester. By the end of the semester, they can have their data. We can work together on analyzing it and they can move it forward to do a poster presentation and, to include it in an application for a PhD program to reflect on those experiences. So without the lab, an undergraduate student collecting a data set would be fairly inaccessible, to be honest. If you think about if I went out to an online service to collect the data, it would cost hundreds and hundreds or thousands of dollars to collect such a data set just to get a couple hundred people to fill out a questionnaire. Through the lab, the student can get data that would otherwise be inaccessible, right? They can develop their own surveys, their own research questions, they could administer the questionnaires, and in a semester, they can have a data set that allows them to proceed with a research project.
I think for me, the most important thing is interest. Often when like students are looking at the survey right now or the studies, the experiments, they're like, oh, I didn't know this is marketing. This is what people do in marketing. Like there's such a disconnect in a way between what academia does and what students are perceiving what a certain subject should be about. And they're like, wow, this is psychology. And then I was like, yeah, we're teaching that all in the classroom. But like the moment they get active, they do things hands-on, like just the questions you get, it's so rewarding and it's so cool. And I think in the future we want to kind of push this a little bit more to see that undergrads are getting engaged, but even seeing the TAs which are helping with the lab right now. It's very cool. And this is one of the first things they put on their resume, the experience with the lab of administering, reaching out. Or why we also reach out to other universities to see what they are doing, just to get ideas and get putting TAs in a position like this. And they are constantly involved. I think that's a huge bonus for them too. And I remember them going just back how they talked to me. I was like, oh my God, this is like fantastic on my resume. And so these are chances I would love to have had as an undergrad, but I got similar as Michael involved in research since my undergraduate days, and it has never left me. So I think that's something when students gain this experience, that's something they keep for the rest of their life, if they go into academia or not.
Where would you guys say the lab is going? What should people be looking for? in the next year or two?
That's a good question. I feel like now we're at a point where we're more established. I got the processes down,
Yeah.
what to expect. So we can go now more into like the undergrad research part. I got a tech grant last year, so we have a potential space in Davie. We could build out as a lab. This is all like in the future. Yeah, gets to see if businesses can get involved, maybe collect their data here with us, because our students are important. They give us a lot of information. So this can be used from the business community, the local community around it. So
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of opportunity. I'm just so glad that we got received so positively between all of us, because that's important.
Yeah.
The lab cannot do it. I cannot do it by myself. I need people like Michael. I need every researchers. I need instructors involved because they are making it happen. I cannot force anybody to offer extra credit, for
No.
example, right? It's a huge teamwork with a lot of buy-in. So I think growing it slowly but steadily is how we get to a much better result in the future.
Do you have any?
No, I got nothing
Plans?
beyond that. I just know I'll be running studies probably every semester. You know, I don't
Okay.
know. I'm working on something we can talk about another time. Some job embarrassment stuff,
Okay.
being embarrassed by your job. You know, what's up with
Interesting.
that? We'll figure it out. We'll see. But yeah, no, I'm just excited we have it and that the students are interested and involved and passionate about it. So yeah, it's all looking good to me.
Yeah, he wants his own podcast. You hear that?
We'll see about that. Last question for you guys. If someone is listening and they want to get involved, what is the best way?
COB Insights.
Okay.
So email us, go on our website. We have tried to write it out as much as we can. We want to make it easy on people. We want
Yes.
people to enjoy research from any kind of angle, like researchers, instructors, students.
So what's the URL? Throw the URL out
Oh my
there.
God. This is like the most complicated
It's a
thing.
complicated URL. Google it.
Just
You
Google
will pop
FAU.
Insights Lab.
Any last thoughts?
So let's get a shorter URL.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for letting us
Of course.
talk about the lab. I think the more we put it in people's head, it's the more they want to run studies, the more everybody wants to participate. And as Michael started off the podcast, win-win for all of us.
Win-win.
So,
Yeah, thanks so much for having
yeah.
us.
No, thank you guys so much for making the time. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss an episode. And if this resonated with you, be sure to share it with a colleague. And I will see you all back here at the next episode.